So Wigner was not terribly successful in making converts in the nuclear community. But he did make one convert, this guy, Alvin Weinberg. He was his student during the Manhattan Project. Weinberg got it. He got the big picture. We need thorium, we need thermal reactor, we need liquid fuel. I see it. I see what we got to do. Weinberg got a job offer to be the director of Oak Ridge National Labs in 1955. He was 35 years old. Well, about that time, the Air Force said the Navy has built their nuclear submarines, and the Army has come along and they have taken the same technology as the Navy, the water-cooled reactor, and they're doing their thing. But the Air Force wants to build a nuclear-powered bomber. I mean, does that just sound like crazy? It was just absolutely nuts. Now, Weinberg was a practical man, and he said, nuclear-powered bomber. That is like probably a really, really, really dumb idea. But the military has a lot of money. That the purpose was unattainable, if not foolish, was not so important. A high-temperature reactor could be useful for other purposes, even if it never propelled an airplane. They couldn't use water-cooled reactors. They couldn't use high-pressure reactors. They couldn't use complicated solid-fuel reactors. They had to have something that was so slick, that was so safe, that was so simple, that operated at low pressure, high temperatures, had all the features you wanted in it. They didn't even know what it was. If this program, this nuclear airplane program, had not been established, the molten salt reactor would have never been invented, because it is simply too radical, too different, too completely out of the ball field of everything else for it to be arrived at through an evolutionary development. It had to be forced into existence by requirements that were so difficult to achieve, and the nuclear airplane was that.
A decade before he called nuclear power society's biggest Faustian bargain, Alvin Weinberg was one of the country's leading nuclear physicists. He invented the light water reactor, the world's most common kind today, the type used at Fukushima. But in the 1960s, as director of Oak Ridge National Laboratory, he began to pursue another idea, called the molten salt reactor. Instead of operating at high pressure with a solid fuel made of uranium, it worked at low pressure, using a liquid fuel that could be made of thorium. Thorium has many advantages. It can produce about 90 times as much energy as uranium and a fraction of the waste. And that waste isn't useful for making bombs. The reactor was considered walk-away safe because it relied on physics, not machines or humans, to keep the reaction under control.
So far, the molten salt reactor experiment has operated successfully and has earned a reputation for reliability. I think that someday the world will have commercial power reactors of both the uranium-plutonium and the thorium-uranium fuel cycle types.
I think when people see it, they understand it a lot better. So a light water reactor, you're constantly trying to keep it from going out of control. You're constantly trying to manage it with control rods and moving the fuel rods. Molten salt reactor is the opposite. You're constantly trying to keep it liquid. You're trying to keep it reactive. You're trying to keep it circulating. And if it ever stopped, it would just drain down into the drain tank or solidify in place or just stop reacting. So it's just a much better design overall. This thing can't explode. This thing is ready to explode. And you gotta have redundant systems. You gotta have a pump and a pump and a pump and a pump. You know, it's not walk-away safe. It's not self-controlled. You need, computers and operators and controllers to constantly monitor this thing. Whereas this thing's completely self-regulated. If an earthquake and a 747 and a tidal wave hit it all at once and the chamber tipped over, what would happen? The fluid would flow into this hot cell, down this pool, and into this storage tank.
Despite some hiccups, the reactor ran successfully for a record 6 years. But Alvin Weinberg's concerns about the safety of light water reactors, which were then being built in the United States, had made him unpopular inside the Nixon administration. In 1973, he was fired, and the reactor was shut down.
The project was eventually terminated, but I still think that, eventually people will come back to this way of trying reactors.
Today, the research lives on through the internet. On countless websites, thorium fans say the United States could build a new reactor with the right laws, around $1 billion, and public support.